Hello, home coffee roasters. Thanks for joining me today here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. We're going to be focusing on 3 challenges that many home coffee roasters are going to face while they're learning how to roast coffee at home, and at least at some point in their hobby as home roasters. Before we get into the challenges, I wanted to give you a brief update on a home coffee roasting unit that I have just started using in the last few weeks. That is the Fresh Roast SR540. This unit is a great unit, and I did a review of it in my last video. I've been very happy with it, but I joined a new club that I wanted to tell you about, and that is the Broken Roaster Chamber Club for the SR540. It's probably a weak spot of the roaster. I identified it as one that I was a little concerned about. The roaster seems to be well built, but this roasting chamber, I was basically going to be cleaning it, washing it, and I have an extension tube that is part from the manufacturer, an accessory, and I was removing that, and I didn't pull it straight out. I just angled it a tiny bit, and that was enough to just shatter the roasting chamber. Not excited about that. I've got a new one on order, and I should have it here soon because I've got some upcoming videos that we're going to be talking about, primarily focusing on temperature. I want to have a conversation about temperature with air roasters as well as other roasting devices. I think it's going to be a really interesting topic because we're all referencing temperatures. We're all talking about temperatures. And there are some things that we need to kind of put out there that I think will be really helpful for everyone. So those are some upcoming videos once I get this roasting chamber replaced. All right, now let's get to the 3 challenges that most home coffee roasters are going to face. The first challenge is following a roasting recipe and having things not work out the way that you planned. I've shared roasting recipes here on this channel. I've had people comment to me, "Hey, Mike, I've tried your roasting recipe and it didn't work." Or I had one recently where somebody said, "Hey, the coffee actually went a little over roasted, it got burned." And yes, we have different tastes and different preferences for our roasting style, but that isn't really the issue here. We shouldn't necessarily follow an exact roasting recipe because there are some variables that are going to influence the result of our coffee. The first is we may be roasting different types of coffee. I may be roasting an Ethiopian coffee and you're roasting a Guatemalan coffee. Or they could be 2 different coffees from the same country, but they just have more moisture. One has more moisture than the other, and that, or it be a different bean size. And both of those are going to cause variations in the way the bean is roasted. It may take longer or shorter to roast. Density is another issue. There's just a whole list of variables with a roasting recipe. Another one is the amount of electricity. If you're using a roaster like, say, the Bmore that you plug into the wall, it may take me 5 minutes. We could roast the exact same coffee. It may take this coffee 5 minutes to turn yellow and finish the dry phase on my roaster, but on your roaster, you might be able to do it in 4 minutes. And the reason why is because my voltage coming out of the wall that I have this plugged in is an older wiring in the home, and I just tested my voltage and it's a little low. And so here in the lab, my roasts, I don't get the same power as you might have in your roaster. Same thing goes with the fresh roast as well. So what do we do about that? Well, we don't follow the recipe, but we use the recipe as a guide. What do I mean by that? Instead of doing exactly step 1, step 2, step 3 at these times and these temperatures, we use those as a general expectation of what's going to happen during the roast and what we should do next. But we need to be able to monitor the coffee, the times, the temperatures, the color, the smell, using our senses, all of that. And that way we can have a successful roast. It may have a few variations, but we may have had to apply a little more power or a little less power or a little more air to be able to have our coffee successfully get through each of the phases in the percentages that were talked about in the recipe for the length of time that was talked about in the recipe. I hope that makes sense. That is kind of a primer to a lot of topics that we're going to be covering, and one of them is temperatures. Temperatures, we're going to come to that and deal with that in a few weeks, as I had mentioned earlier. It's going to be a topic, but we need to figure out how to talk with each other and talk to others in the roasting community without relying on a specific temperature. And we'll get to that. We'll talk about that, and hopefully it will be helpful for all of us. All right, the second challenge that many home coffee roasters face is focusing on temperatures for our roasting events rather than other ways, other means of marking our events. And I'll use two examples. The first is when to mark dry end. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about as far as roasting events go and marking the events, I would encourage you to take a look at this playlist up here on Home Coffee Roasting Essentials. It talks about each of the events. I actually have a video on identifying events, and I'll also have a link to that up in the corner that you can check out. But these are really important elements, roasting concepts that you need to learn about so that you can have some great roasts in the future. All right, so we rely on temperatures rather than the other elements of how to call dry end. So many people will use the temperature of 340 degrees, and on every roast, regardless of how long the roast is or how short it is, at 340 degrees, you say, okay, that's dry end, or 330 or 335, whatever the temperature is. The problem with that, the problem that I have, and the reason why I don't do that is because at 340 degrees, that's not always the same temperature for every roast. Depending upon the coffee that you use, its density may vary. Things we've just talked about, we have variations that cause our coffee to take more heat or less heat to get it to dry. I'll just give you an example. Depending upon how hard you're pushing this coffee, how much power you've applied to this coffee, you will reach dry end at a different temperature than you will if you're doing it at a slower rate and you're slowly building up your temperatures. You'll hit dry end before 340 degrees if you're pushing the coffee fast rather than if you're doing it slow. So that's just an example, and that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily rely on temperatures. I rely on color to be able to determine exactly when to call dry end. We can't rely on temperatures because temperatures have inconsistencies based on how we're reading the temperature. Our probe, whether it's the bean temperature or the exhaust temperature, or for air roasters, the inlet temperature, the temperature under the beans coming out of the heating element area where the fan blows the heat, that temperature is going to be different and give you a different reading. And so temperatures are going to vary, and I just think that we shouldn't rely on those. Same with first crack. Some people have a temperature set, so when it hits that temperature, they call that first crack, even if crack started 15 or 20 seconds earlier or 15 or 20 seconds later. And these really make a difference because it affects the phase percentages that help us craft great coffee. How much time we want to spend in the dry phase, the browning phase, and or the development phase. So if you are currently using a temperature to mark your events and you're happy with that, go ahead and do that. I'm not telling you you're wrong. Go ahead and continue to do that. But I would encourage you to pay attention to, say, color for dry and compare that from coffee to coffee, from each roast that you do, especially when you're using a different coffee or you're roasting it in a different style, like a medium roast or a darker roast. I would encourage you to compare those and see if the temperatures vary when the coffee goes from green to yellow. And I think you'll be surprised. Let me know your thoughts or what you see happening if you try that. Share those in the comments. I would really appreciate that. And again, first crack, if you're monitoring temperatures for first crack, that's going to potentially affect how much time in the browning phase and or the development phase, and it can influence the flavor of the cup. So I would encourage you again, if you've got thoughts on that, share those in the comments. I'd love to hear that. Okay, before I get to the third point, I wanted to give you an update on the channel here. We're coming into the summer months, and I've got a lot going on this summer, and so my videos may be a little inconsistent. I may have a few weeks that I miss here and there, but I have plenty of videos planned. I'm excited to address a lot of really cool videos. I'm going to be dealing with the temperature topic in a couple of different ways. We're going to be pulling out some different roasters to use, and we're going to be talking about roasting concepts. And I want to talk more about not only temperatures, but I want to talk about how we're reading temperatures and bean probes and how that might influence our approach to roasting coffee. So I've got that in store. Plus, I'm going to have some real basic intro to roasting coffee videos that I'm going to be doing. So plenty of things going on here on the channel I'm excited to do. So stick around. And also, if you like what you've watched here on the channel, hit the like button here for this video. That really helps me out. And of course, always subscribe. That is something that really benefits this channel as well. All right, the third point for a challenge that all home coffee roasters or most home coffee roasters are going to face is interpreting color and smell while we roast. I've got a whole video on using our senses for smell and for color, but I wanted to hit this point because it's a frustrating point for a lot of new home coffee roasters and even those that are more seasoned. I've talked with plenty of people, and one of the biggest challenges is being able to identify the end of the dry phase and when exactly to do that. And I've talked about this in several videos, but I wanted to bring out this point because using our senses and being able to practice when to call yellow or when to call first crack, these are really important events that will influence the flavor of our coffee. And it takes practice to be able to decide when to call dry end, and you need good lighting, you need good access to the beans, and if you have that, then you need to decide consistently when to call dry. And the example that I always give, and I would encourage you to consider, is to wait till all of the beans are yellow, when there's no green left. And sometimes, it's not a perfect science. You'll get pretty close, but you just watch the green and it'll get less and less and less. And then you'll look and you'll think, I don't think I see any more green. And bam, that's your call for the end of dry. First crack. Everybody has a different method. I've had some people say that the very first crack they hear, that's when they call first crack. And if that's working for you, go ahead and continue to do that. I would recommend waiting for successful cracks. And the reason why I do that is to know that first crack has actually started. There's always beans that are outlying beans that will crack before first crack has really started. And I usually wait for successive cracks and then mark that as the beginning of the development phase at first crack. So I would encourage you to consider that. Practice using your senses for sight and for smell while you come to each of these events, the coffee events, the dry end, first crack, and then close to drop, or if you're going to hit second crack, pay attention to the aroma of the roast so that you can kind of get an idea of what's happening to the coffee. You'll smell yeasty, bready smells when you're getting close to dry end. You'll start to smell some sweetness in the baked goods, and that is the beginning of that Maillard, that browning phase, where a lot of the flavor development takes place. And so as you're roasting your coffee, pay attention to what you're smelling and make some notes. It's really important to be able to write all this stuff down, and that way you'll become familiar with it, and then you will be able to better mark your events. Okay, I would love to hear your comments and thoughts on that as well. Share what's happening with your coffee roasting experience as far as challenges that you have had. Not just the three that I've mentioned, but if you've got other ones you want to mention those in the comments section as well. I've got a couple videos here that you should check out related to what we talked about today. And also, YouTube has picked out a video that might be of interest to you. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you the next time here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. Have a great week roasting. See you next time.